Hi, everybody. I'm going to start the introduction while everyone's filtering in. Hello, welcome. I'm Heather Bhandari, adjunct lecturer in visual art, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to our seventh and final artist lecture in the visual arts department for the 2020-2021 school year. And boy, it has been quite a year. Tonight, I am so excited to introduce you to the artist Vanessa German. I cannot imagine a better and more beautiful way to end the year. Before I get to her bio, I want to acknowledge a few things. First, our common digital void and remind us of the ground beneath our feet. I want to acknowledge I'm situated in Brooklyn, which is the unceded land of the Munsee Lenape, and that the List Art Center, where our department is located, sits on occupied indigenous lands of the Narragansett people. We recognize them as the original stewards of this land and pay respect to their elders, past, present, and future. I also want to highlight that we're connected by a campus that relied on the African slave trade in the Americas, and that there are buildings on campus constructed by enslaved people. These acknowledgements commit us to a lifetime of education, action, and anti-racist work. I want to thank Leslie Bostrom, the chair of visual arts, Winnie Geyer, the photographer and graphic designer of our dreams, Christine Dodd, an organizing wonder, and MVP Olanda Estrada, who worked tirelessly behind the scenes for many years. We're going to miss her so much. Thank you, Olanda. I also want to thank Sean Tavares, Gregory Picard, and BAI for making this lecture and our gathering possible. A few more things to note. We kindly ask that you please refrain from recording this event. We're recording it, and it will be available through the department's website in the coming weeks. If you would like to take screenshots, please tag @BrownVisualArt and @Vanessa L. German. After Vanessa's presentation, there'll be ample time for Q&A, but Vanessa has asked that you please type questions into the Q&A window at the bottom of your screen whenever you have them. Vanessa will answer when appropriate. And finally, hello to all of you out there sharing this digital space. I can't wait to see you in person someday, hopefully soon. Okay, so now I get to welcome Vanessa German, citizen artist. I heard through the grapevine about Vanessa's amazing work and her spirit, even before I found myself awed by her powerful work. Then in 2019, which was only 2 years ago, but seems like a lifetime ago, the Ford Foundation opened their gallery with the exhibition Perilous Bodies. And Vanessa's spoken word opera was performed for the 1,000+ people waiting in the line to see the show. It was absolutely arresting. As you might imagine, hundreds of people crowded into an enormous echoey atrium is deafening. But the moment Vanessa began to tell her story through talking, singing, chanting, humming, everyone was silent, absolutely silent. I remember the part of the piece that asked us to imagine the world's armies being replaced by artists. And I still daydream about it to this day. What if our defense contracts and that unbelievable amount of money went to artists like Vanessa imagined? How would the world be different? I read her talk about how it's her business to feel, hear, and witness. But I absolutely love it when I hear her speak and reflect back on what she's learned. I find it to be a really generous act. So, and we're obviously, it's really exciting for her to be here with us tonight. Now for her official bio. Vanessa German is a visual and performance artist based in the Pittsburgh neighborhood of Homewood. Homewood is the community that is the driving force behind German's powerful performance work and whose cast-off relics form the language of her copiously embellished sculptures. As a citizen artist, German explores the power of art and love as a transformative force in the dynamic cultural ecosystem of communities and neighborhoods. She's the founder of Love Front Porch and ARThouse, a community arts initiative for the children of Homewood, which is currently being rebuilt. Her work is in the private and public collections of the Everson Museum of Art, the Figge Art Museum, Flint Institute of the Arts, Spelman College Museum of Fine Art, Crystal Bridges Museum of Art, David C. Driskell Center, Snite Museum of Art, the Wadsworth Atheneum Museum of Art, and the Wellin Museum of Art at Hamilton College. German's fine artwork has been exhibited widely, most recently at the Figge Art Museum, the Union for Contemporary Art, the Fralin Museum of Art at the University of Virginia, Flint Institute of the Arts, the Mattress Factory, Everson Museum of Art, Spelman College, the Wadsworth Atheneum, the Studio Museum, the Ringling Museum of Art, and Crystal Bridges. Her work has been featured on CBS Sunday Morning, NPR's All Things Considered, and it's been in the Huffington Post, O Magazine, and Essence Magazine. She's the recipient of the 2015 Lewis Comfort Tiffany Foundation Grant, the 2017 Jacob Lawrence Award from the American Academy of Arts and Letters, and the 2018 United States Artist Grant. Most recently, she got the 2018 Don Tyson Prize from Crystal Bridges. Please join me in the warmest welcome we can muster through digital space for Vanessa German.
Greetings, everyone. Hi. It's good to be here with you. I wish that I could see your faces and hear your voices and have a conversation with you. I like to actually begin my talks with conversations and seeing and feeling where everyone is. So in the absence of your physical presence, could you all just take a moment to communicate with me through your hearts and just feel where you are for yourself, and give me this moment. Hi, Rosemary. Thank you for taking the time to say hi to me. So I want to thank everyone who made this talk possible. Thank Chris from Pavel Zubik Gallery, who answers all the emails, and just thank everyone at Brown who made it possible for me to be here with you all today. I'm gonna begin the talk by making a poem for someone. So I can see the chat on my screen, and I'm gonna freestyle a poem for anybody who wants. This will help me ground myself in this space and this time that we have together. And it's an important part of my practice, which is focused on human technology, on the technologies that we have in our innate, inherent mechanism and beingness as human beings. So I'm just going to choose somebody who puts the following information into the chat. I need you to put in a hi, Kelvin. I need you to put in, if for me to make this poem for someone, put in a name. It doesn't have to be your name. It can be anybody's name who comes to your heart, and a color. Just let it resonate with you, and a power. And the way you think about the power or formulate the response to power is by dint of this moment happening here on the planet Earth, in this physical realm, in this digital place. By dint of this moment happening, you can choose for this poem to have the power to make anything happen just because this moment is happening. So it could defy the laws of gravity. It could make sandwiches for everybody in the world. Just you decide. So somebody put in the chat a name, a color, and a power. And I'll see that come up, and then I'm going to freestyle a poem with you, and we will start. I want to say that I'm a Black woman. I today have long, wavy, sort of wild hair. I'm wearing a pink necklace and a pink blouse. I have a round face and a gap tooth smile. And I am in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which is Haudenosaunee Seneca Nation land that was violently taken from people who still exist. And I am on this land creating art and living the fullest human life that I can possibly bring out of my being. So I'm going to look in the chat, and I am going to choose some. Thank you all for your answers. I am going to go with, is this name pronounced Anika, green, and fly? This is for Maria. So I'm gonna say Anika, and I might say Anika sometimes, green and fly. So I'm gonna do this freestyle, and then we're gonna start the talk. I wish I could be with you in person and look into your eyes as I do this, but you please feel the love and the creative energy that comes from my heart to your heart as I make this poem for a human being who has a face like springtime, rising up and shining through the brightness of the light of their eyes and the whites of their teeth as they grin cheek to cheek and ear to ear. Here is a name for the green of springtime, for how cycles of life live and rise and spiral inside of us, bringing us fuller and fuller and fuller into the fullness of our own selves, if we're courageous enough to actually be ourselves in a world that fights us against the thing itself. And here, for the power of love and for the power of joy and for the power of creativity through this digital realm, through every realm of consciousness, through all the realms in which we recognize the power that exists in our own heartbeat. Here, for the shape of Annika's face, for the sound of sunlight coming out of her mouth, tripping with laughter and giggling in the green lights and the spires of brightness that rise from the tip of my fingers and into the screen this very instant. I am thinking about the songs that my mother used to sing that brought her joy. And I am singing these songs with my heart and with every cell of my body and sending it out into the wilderness, into this infinite space between us, and ringing back around a song of love and joy to Maria and Annika, to Suzette and Kelvin, to everyone who took the time to put a little bit of information in a chat box on a Wednesday at an artist talk that is happening just exactly the way that it is supposed to happen. So thank you for letting me ground myself in the space with you all with that poem. And I begin my talk by letting you know that what I'm going to try to do in this time is to be as clear and as honest and as present in my language about my practice and my process that I'm able to do. You can ask questions at any point of this talk. I should see the question pop up in the Q&A. And I want that to happen because there's a chance that your curiosity will take us to a place that my sort of formulaic talk might not necessarily take us. And I'm really interested in the vibrancy and the life that lives inside of that curiosity. So do put questions in, and then I'll answer them when I see them, and I'll respond to them at the time. But there also will be the opportunity to ask questions at the end. I am going to speak about my practice in a shape of wholeness, which means I don't separate any part of my life from any other part of my life. I am give myself the title citizen artist because it's a way that I can give shape to the way the focus that I have on living my human existence with my dimensional citizenship in focus through love and through art. So I'll talk about my practice in a space of wholeness as opposed to it being like this regimented work and process that happens separate from the rest of my being. I'm going to speak about this in a place of wholeness and with as much clarity in language and thoughtfulness and focus as I'm able to. So join me as I share the screen and we talk and look at some images. So I begin this conversation with the phrase, I believe in the power of art. And this phrase is a good place to start. We're going to talk about belief in a couple of different ways, but it is important that you know that I am using art on purpose, and I'm using art experimentally. I'm using art politically, spiritually, culturally. I'm using it medicinally, the way that a pharmacist would move compounds around. I'm really I really want to expand and burst through any barrier that would prevent me from experiencing the fullness of the power of art. I want to ask as much as I can have the courage to ask from art, from the experience, process, practice, all of it. I'm going to ask a lot of this in my life, and I do ask a lot from it. So as we go into looking at images and to talking about things, hold into your heart and into your intellectual process this truth that I am activating art and its power on purpose. And what I would ask of you to consider, question inside of yourself is, the one is, do you believe in the power of art? And if you do believe in the power of art, what do you ask it to do? What do you ask of that power? And also, if you could make a work of art that had the power to do anything, what would you ask that work of art to do? So I believe in the power of art. I told you that I give myself the title citizen artist because I want to center my inhabitation as a complete and whole human being through love and through art, through creativity. So my practice really focuses and centers on human technology and the dimensional wholeness of myself, right? And of other human beings. And so we'll talk more about how my living definitions for human technologies. So this is me. This is little Black Vanessa, that little curly haired child growing up round and wild and a little scruffy and dark Black, dark brown in Los Angeles, California, growing up in the 80s and in the 90s. My mother was a fiber artist. You'll see one of my mother's quilts in the image. Also, my mother grew up as an artist. So a lot of the art that I encountered in our home was from my mother's collection. And a lot of it was woman-centered, Black female body-centered artwork. And my mother was the first person to introduce me to the Black Madonna. And the picture in the center is the oldest photograph that we have in our family of our ancestors. And that's a cotton field in Alabama and a Black woman with 3 younger women seated around her. The quilt is called Behold, We Are the Stuff of Stars. And it is an image of a Black figure centered, holding a brown baby with fiber stars around it. So this image is important because you need to know that I'm a self-taught artist. But a self-taught artist really means that I have opened the frequency of my creative capacities from the time I was a child, and that was through my mother. My mother raised us to be creative people. We grew up in Los Angeles in the 80s and 90s, and she did not let us out to play a lot, like on the street, like ride bikes and do stuff. My mother would put art supplies all over the kitchen table, and she would say, make something, make a toy, make fun, do something, because you're not going outside. And we weren't going outside because the world for little Black children to play outside in was full of potholes and traps. And I remember being a little girl and recognizing that a lot of children were dying. They were being killed. They were being killed a number of different ways. And so as a really small kid, I had to decide how I wanted to stay alive and be alive in my life. So Felicia asks, how do you live in the fullness and sometimes rawness of your emotion as an artist and not be devoured by them? What grounds you? So I recognize emotional technology as a force of power. And I recognize also inside of being an emotional human being who's not afraid of being emotional in America, which is kind of had a long epidemic of feellessness, of really supporting and encouraging not feeling. I recognize that not every thought that I think is true. And so I have a balanced relationship with both the hypersensitivity that I have as an emotional being, and with my intellectual capacities. And then also what really grounds me is having a present and as much courageous relationship as possible that I can have with grace. Like having grace for myself, having grace for days that are different shapes and times when I have reached my emotional capacity, and just knowing that I will be okay. Having that kind of grace is really helpful for me. So thanks for that question. And so looking at this, I acknowledge my ancestors. I am acknowledging that as a self-taught artist, some of the teaching that has been given to me has come through the technology of my body. It's come through my DNA. It has come through my mother. It has come through me being curious and in close proximity with interesting people in the world. So being self-taught does not mean that I have not had a life of research and a life of rigor and a life of reading and a life of experimenting and exploring. It just means that I took this way of, I got my education, and I'm receiving my education in the constant simultaneity of being alive in the world that we're in. So being alive in the world that we're in, growing up around a lot of street death, and really recognizing as a young person that I have to decide how I'm going to be alive. I also came to a really hard place, as so many people did in my 20s, where I needed to consciously choose how to not die. Right. And so one of the ways that I did that was to do this like experiment on myself, where every day for 6 months, I gave myself 6 months to stay alive. And every day for 6 months, I would do whatever I wanted to do. And whatever I wanted to do meant that I was paying very close attention to all of these interesting materials that were on the ground in my neighborhood. I'd go walk through vacant houses and abandoned lots. And I was really drawn to scrap wood and old metal and little shiny things like a wild crow or something. And I gave myself permission to follow the line, to follow the feeling, to follow that which called me, these objects that called me. And I was really trying to figure out if life would be about suffering for me, if that, or if I was not going to stay alive. And so what I found inside of my what was really myself coming into a clearer frequency of my life and my voice as an artist, what I found was that I could think more clearly, that I could process all thoughts, that I could feel myself and my body and my feelings without suffering and without tangling them inside of a creative practice, doing a lot of tedious, meticulous, like rhythmic work inside of making things. And I wasn't calling myself an artist at this time. Really, I was just trying to not die. And not dying meant that I had to keep my hands busy. And I kept my hands busy finding stuff on the street and then making accumulations of objects. And those accumulations of objects eventually became 6 power figures. I called them power figures because they literally showed me that they had the power to keep me alive. At the time, I was not in relationship with the language of power figures from indigenous and tribal cultures. It wasn't until a historian saw my work at a summer festival and said, "Hey, you're doing that thing that they do in the Congo with the nails." And I said, "I have no idea what you mean." And that person said, "You need to do some research." And so in doing research, I found images like this, which is Congo Nkisi power figure. I think this is in the collection of the Met. And I saw a language in this materiality, in the accumulation on the form, in the feeling that the spirit injected into me. I found a place that I recognized inside of myself. I recognized a language of isness that this object is. And I recognized so much of the vocabulary of it innately inside of myself, because when I started working with nails, I picked them up because I needed a material, physical language to speak to a texture that I was experiencing in my body and in my soul that I had no language for. So the object became the language, the nail became that language. And what I would do with it, I found out through research, was being done for thousands of years, and that it had this meaning. And so I started to look at more power figures and sort of look at more African tribal art and keep trying to find that feeling of language recognition. I'm trying to find that way that the material resonates with me with a clarity that is more profound than language. I kept looking for those things that were arriving through objects and through materials that spoke to parts of myself that I hadn't given language to before, and nobody had given me language for. And I was obsessively drawn to these small figures. From the time I was a child, I was like obsessed with the way that dolls were made, with the carving for the molds of their hands and their faces, and what it meant to make a small figure. I was like really obsessed with it, and it would bring me so much joy as a child to study the intricacies of these small figures that were dolls. And so seeing Congo and Kisi power figures and recognizing a connection between this obsession, possession, sort of tsunami of joy that I would experience in dissecting baby dolls when I was a kid, and meeting that feeling that I had as a child with a recognition of the spirit and materiality of the Nkisi power figures, made me wonder and question even more what was already inside of me. Really looking like an excavator at who I am and what already exists within my being. So I wanted to know what was already of my body, of my feelings, of my instincts, of my earthliness and my connection to the land. I wanted to know what I was as a human being. And so I began to use art to have that exploration about who I was and what was already in me by instigating a practice that was free in the horizon of my own instincts. So this is one of my earliest work, an early work, and it's called Tar Baby on a Pig on a Box with an N. And when I look at this work now, I see all of these connections, as so many of you probably do when you look at your early artwork or you read your earlier work, and you see that a part of you had been revealed to yourself through that work. And maybe you thought you were working with some specific concept, but as you grew into the fullness of your humanity, you realized that there was maybe something secret inside of the work that you created that was speaking to you. So I see this so much in the work that I created early. And what I see is me sort of contending with the Black female body, the Black girl body, Black girlhood. And for me, really contending with the fact that my first messages about my own body as a Black girl were that I should hate my body. I should hate my body into submission. I should hate my body, but do the very, very best that I can, do the best and most that I can to be as close to white as possible, whether it was with skin bleaching creams, making my body as thin as possible, speaking a certain way, and that would be my saving grace, would be to try to be as white as possible. I did not ingest messages of loving a fat body, loving a queer body, loving my own body until I was well into my adulthood. And so in a lot of my earlier work, I see myself contending with the lie around the Black body, the lie that the Black body is not sacred, the lie that the Black body is not dimensionally powerful and exquisite in its beauty. So I see myself contending with the lies around the Black body on this American land, and contending with the systems and the structures of that while also trying to relieve my being of the tension and the incredible anxiety that comes with living on a land that does not see or hold you in your wholeness. So Tar Baby on a pig on a box with an N. It's on purpose. The mirror at the top of that sculpture came from an old whaling ship. That mirror is like from the 18th century or something. And everything in the work means something. And I realized that one of the things I was doing in making these early power figures is I was putting secrets in them, and I was secreting my rage inside of these sculptures because I was not ever safe to really express this rage. This is a work that's in the collection of the Spelman Museum. It's called Delia and the Plane. And it is also me sort of going inside of myself past the lies that internalized white supremacy, internalized anti-Blackness had constipated in my spirit and in my humanness, digging past all of the filth of those lies and turning a sacred eye onto the body of Black women, onto my own Black body, but also placing that Black body and returning it to sacredness in the midst of the ongoing turmoil that I would experience in my own body. So some of these earlier works, I am definitely contending with the Black body on American land and returning the body to sacredness and returning a liberty that is truer than the liberty that is spoken about in this nation's political documents, really bringing images and experiences in the process of making the work, bringing experiences of true liberty to myself through the creative process, which was actually bringing me into the state of more fully becoming myself, but also doing that through historical images and through these creation of power figures that I was always asking to do something. So playing with the American flag a lot in the work, because one of the first times I got in trouble in school was when I was like in the 2nd or 3rd grade, and we were learning about what the colors on the American flag were for. White was for peace, red was for blood, the blue was for glory. And I remember asking, I mostly had white teachers all through while I was growing up. Maybe I had 3 or 4 teachers of color, but this white teacher, an older white teacher, when I said whose blood and whose glory, like I was really curious. I was like, well, it's the American flag. Are they talking about Native American people, or are they talking about real Americans? Are they talking about the people who built America? Is it like the blood of Black people? And I got in trouble for that. And my mother had to come to school, and my mother told the teacher that Vanessa has the right to question authority. So I was always really confounded by the hypocrisy that I experienced in America, but definitely didn't have the language or the courage to unsilence that. And so I would secret it into my sculptures, contending with these old ethnic notions like the Aunt Jemima, the shinola, it's like shit or shinola, like that whole shoe polish thing, and really being drawn towards materials that called me to consider their resonance in both the past, the present, and the future, and then to sort of play with those symbols and those notions magically and a little heroically, but definitely also medicinally. So earlier work, hiding, putting secrets inside, putting riddles inside of the work, drawn to all of these materials that speak to Americana and speak to the glory of Americana, but also hiding a truth inside of there that is the same submerged truth that impacts my everyday life. And when I look at this work now, I can see that I was exploring freedom and polarity, innocence and rage, a lot of innocence and rage, because I, like injustice has a feeling to it. And anger is the emotional expression of injustice, but I knew the first time the police threatened to put me in handcuffs was when I was like 7 or 8 years old. I said something to a police officer who was being really, he was treating my mother like she was a smushed ball of newspaper or something. And I said something to him and he threatened to put me in handcuffs. So I learned really young that even to express like a righteous rage or anger is really dangerous. And so in a lot of my early work, I got to dig through those places that were really human places for me. So the work, when I say I believe in the power of art, I believe in the power of art because it has never let me down. Art allows me to move through places and allows me to adventure into realms that I can't imagine another life that would be for me for that. To call police uses telephone, secrets, power, inserting riddles, and inserting into the work my own secret language of sacredness and my own secret language of like being able to actually express the weight that I feel. So a lot of times on the heads of earlier works, you'll see these old German doll heads that were actually dug out of a bombed out doll factory in Germany. A man would send them to me, you know, a couple times a year. But that way that I didn't hide from the polarity of the thing, right? But also secreting something in there. See, there are secrets inside of a lot of my work, and contending with that space of innocence, childness, childlike play, and also the rage that can come when as a child you recognize that you are being squished. So just a few more images of early work. I no longer make single discrete objects like this. So it's really good it was really great for me to go back and check in with all of these images, and those images of the doll heads, the figures, the symbols of the doll heads on top of my head, that sort of psychic weight of white supremacist delusion, that weight that is the secret places where anti-Blackness and you know, turned into self-loathing, and it got inside of you, and you can see a spigot, and you all of the symbols in there read as a healing spell that reckons with the weight of the story that exists. So the reckoning is really something that is like really specific work to be done on this land to reckon with the full story. This is an anatomical model of the artist's body. And just more early work where I can see how I was working in fear sometimes, working afraid, or working really pushing to bring out that spear of clarity that is inside of me. So always in the work was the presence of sacredness and the opposite of sacredness. And coming to a place where I'm working with power and all of these symbols and accumulation and assemblage, and really asking the work to dig out the places of self-loathing and dig out places of limitation and dig out the lies from myself, and trying to find language for the shape of the lies, and trying to find pathways into the truth. So whenever you see my work and it's on a skateboard or it's on a little car, I'm really asking that work to be a vehicle of transformation to take us somewhere. And this work is in the collection of Crystal Bridges. Artist considers the 21st century implications of psychosis as a public health crisis. And so what I'm really saying in that is that white supremacy is psychosis, that it is a form of pathological delusion, and it's going to be a public health crisis, and we're going to have to contend with it largely and publicly, or this is a funny artwork, right? Or I'm playing with you. It's that polarity. So coming then into a place where I'm asking the work to do very specific things for me and in reckoning. And so coming out of looking at some early work and just moving into looking at a few installations before it's time to go, I will say, like, I believe in the power of art. Like, you know, Toni Morrison, I think, would say, so what? This is a Toni Morrison quote. And I love how she says, make up a story for our sake and yours, forget your name in the street. Tell us what the world has been to you in the dark places and in the light, that place of polarity that I was talking about earlier. Don't tell us what to believe, what to fear. Show us belief's wide skirt and the stitch that unravels fear's call. So I think about that and how it's not enough to believe in something, that you have to stitch a truth together so clearly with that which what you believe, that with that force of belief, that its momentum becomes a weapon and it can undo fear. And so for me, what I was asking the work to do and asking my belief in the power of art to do was to release me from all of the unconscious accumulation and scarring that came into me because my body is on this land at this time. So these are some of the things that I realized, that, you know, to be your whole self is to be your most dangerous self, especially as a Black, fat, queer, joyful, creative artist who, you know, believes that you can unify relativity and quantum theory, right? So I'm thinking about how on this land I was never supposed to really be whole. That wasn't in the imaginations of people. And so one of the things I'm thinking a lot about now is whose imagination gets to make the future. So these are just some of the things that I was interested in inhabiting in my humanity as a citizen artist. So coming and moving out of my house with artwork onto the street and really beginning to consider where we're showing art, where we talk about art, who's welcome in places that have historically shown art and moved with artists. And so I got a grant to do an artist residency on my own front porch because I wanted to see if it was possible to get funding to just be who I was and do what I was already doing. So I wrote this grant to do an artist residency on my own front porch. And I told the foundation that the entire community is the museum, that the porch and the sidewalk are the exhibition spaces, the performance spaces, and the galleries. So I would take work out of the house, and my friends would photograph me on street corners with artwork, and I would make these shirts that say I heart Homewood. It's the neighborhood I live in, because I kept working with young people who absolutely were convinced that their life could finally begin when they got out of this neighborhood. And it was important that I communicate with them that their life was happening right where they were, everywhere they were, and that's not something to let slip past you. So moving the artwork out of the house onto porches, this is me getting my hair braided down the street with a sculpture. And you end up having these amazing conversations with people who have incredible creative energy, but maybe are disconnected from traditional art spaces. So talking about art on the street, on my front porch, making art on my front porch led to me inviting children. The children invited themselves to make art with me on my front porch. They were like, Miss Vanessa, can I do what you're doing? And they would jump the fence. And so gave them this little girl's painting on slate from the roof of a house that was demolished. At the top of the screen, you see a Yamaha sign, because my father would get these instruments from thrift stores and I would put them on the porch and kids would play with the instruments and they'd make art while I was working on my sculptures. And eventually, you know, people would come by my house and they would say, do you run a daycare? And I'd be like, I do not, absolutely do not run a daycare. These kids are just artists and they're making art. So this is just some images of what that was like before the art house came into existence. Kids would come to my house after school. I would give them old t-shirts and let them paint on anything. If you look in the background, there's just painted pieces of slate and wood from when we were working on the house. And this was me coming into this place of understanding that the experience that I had first making the power figure, of sinking into the process of making, having a clarified human system in the creative process, I realized that that would happen with anybody I shared art with. There would just be this time that they would sink into the making, and kids would join me in that. And so I was like, this is a way for me to live my life with love and art at the center of it. And the way that I know that it is love, and that is because I can share it and it will make more of itself. And so with that way of being an artist, a full citizen artist in the citizenship of my entire humanity, everything is available for inspiration. All mediums are forms to inhabit my voice as an artist. And one of the things that would happen when I was out on the porch with the kids is there would be shootings. Like, kids would be getting off the bus and there was a gunfight, and there was all this, it could be really alarming sometimes. And so I started to make these signs that say, "Stop shooting, we love you." And the way that I got a grant to pay for them is, I said the sign was artwork, and every yard that they were in would be the gallery. And so I started making these, eventually made thousands of signs, and moved from making art on the front porch to using a house across the street. That house became the ARThouse, and it became a place that was the perfect sort of experimental existence for me to explore courageously, if I could, what really was possible through the power of art. And this is the first ARThouse, and the image is blurred because it's disturbing. But really saying, like, what does art have the power to do, and how do I open and unlock that power? And it was really important because we were surrounded by so many things that were shrinking and taking our power away from us. So looking at the Black body and Black death, and healing through art, and healing into wholeness, and centering wholeness, dimensional wholeness in my practice. And what you see here is, you go from this experience on a street to me doing almost like a performance of Pieta to be photographed, to be creating the Pieta in sculptural form with my friend's dreadlocks that he cut off, filling these hand-blown glass vessels that live on this sculpture. And so what I was really doing was pushing through as many different mediums, pushing grief out of my body through the practice and through the process, and also being able to give voice to the grief that so many people were feeling and experiencing. And I knew this when I would be at the house with the kids, and they would say wild things to me about death and about shootings. And I realized nobody was really talking to them about that. So Heather asked the question, is there a context outside of formal gallery space that you see your figures thriving? Is your front porch other places you dream to have them, or maybe you just answered? So I'll answer that even more as we go through. So looking at that way that I'm adventuring into the power of art and what's possible through the power of art through many different forms. So this is one of my Black Madonnas, using the image of Sarah Bartman, or what they call the Hottentot Venus, in the center of the piece, which is that practice that I have of returning to sacred view, the historical images of the Black body, present Black body, returning that to a place of sacredness and holiness through the work for myself and for all, the people who interact with it. These are Black Madonnas that are painted on toilet paper and paper towels from the police stations and the emergency rooms, because I was in the emergency room a lot one year, to turning, this is a woman who just lives in my neighborhood, and turning her into the Black Madonna in a field. So I'm exploring this love, artwork, community, back and forth, and I'm weaving my mediums, and I'm creating that, I'm having that same exploration with the power of art, and being called to materiality in relationship and in connection with other human beings, and moving that forward in different ways. So this Venus, it's Serena Williams on the cover of Vogue magazine turned into the Black Madonna, a woman after the Charleston massacres on the front page of a newspaper. So when I'm asking the work to do real work for my real life, and sometimes I'm actually surprised that it's on the walls in museums and it's other places, because a lot of times, especially work like this around grief and the death of, you know, the catastrophe of Black death on this land, I have to figure out how to really grieve and how to mourn in ways that are honest to my soul and to myself. So moving that Black Madonna into large format for the wall, this is like 7 feet tall, 5 feet wide. Then also playing that with my own body. It's a figure, an image of me in the hidden graffiti field, and then it's an image of me as Black Madonna assemblage. So the work is moving into my dimensional wholeness, not just as an artist, but as a lover, as a teacher. So asking the work to be active and to do that. And then moving from making single discrete figures to entire communities of figures. This is an installation called I Come to Do Violence to the Lie. And my studio is pretty small. I can often not walk around one entire sculpture in my space. And so we'll bring things to the alleyway to photograph them. And what's wonderful is what happens when I bring the art outside of my house, just outside in the alleyway or in the neighborhood. And you can see that we have interactions with the work and with each other that are really unique for conversations that you can have in an alleyway. And so moving from making these to single discrete objects and making entirety communities of figures, and loving this Thich Nhat Hanh quote that says basically that the next revolutionary leader isn't going to be a single individual, but will be an entire community of people. So art moving me into a place of really looking at what's possible, how it's possible to inhabit your humanity with love and creativity at the center of that, bringing that out of a personal practice into a communal, cultural, social, spiritual, public practice has been really an important part of how I move. This is some installation images of I Come to Do Violence to the Lie, which began as a Matrix show at the Wadsworth Atheneum. So just check out some images. 31 Black female body-centered images that is aesthetically designed to invoke a sort of sense of the terracotta warriors being in a tunnel underground, only lit by work lights that dangle above the installation coming with an entire soundtrack that is my soundtrack of time that I use inside of my work. And just loving bringing the work outside, to be in the community, to be on the street where I'm asking it to be powerful and to do things. Hi, Hannah, I'm reading your question right now. I went to Kappa for visual arts and have absolute pleasure visiting the ARThouse as well as seeing your work. I was wondering if you have new plans for the ARThouse as it's rebuilt. Okay, so the ARThouse will be rebuilt. It's going to be slow. It's not actually going to be that slow. It'll be rebuilt this year because of COVID and the way that getting permits is more difficult, because the city hasn't come out of like its COVID work shape. It will be like 8 months to a year. The ARThouse will be rebuilt, but it won't be the only ARThouse. I'm also buying a farm for something called ARThouse in the Wilderness, looking at 20 to 100 acre places. I'll buy a farm by the end of the summer, and we'll put 10 to 12 artist residency cabins on the land, because land, I don't really believe that you can actually own land, but that we can steward it and share it. And so having spaces that are beautiful, where there is opportunity for BIPOC artists to come and create in self-directed residencies that are free. So that's what's next for the Art House, is Art House in the Wilderness. The house in Homewood will be able to be fully repaired. And I'm just so grateful for everybody who helped that process happen. Another installation, Sometimes We Cannot Be With Our Bodies. I'm actually going to skip through a lot of this and take you to the place where I began to really explore what it's like to have, to work with people in the community and wherever sometimes we cannot be, sometimes we cannot be with our bodies, is to do a call for artists and community members to come together and to do a ritual around the installation that's called the Goodbye Song, where we grieve and move and dance and delight and joy and release around this sort of state of perpetual grief and mourning that we're in over the snatching and the catastrophe of Black lives being ripped, Black people being ripped from their lives in a land that also sort of greets that happening with a kind of shrug. So doing this ritual called the Goodbye Song. And skipping through that part, this is the Goodbye Song coming together in Omaha. And this is me bringing in that combination of love, art, sharing, and that strata, professional, personal, spiritual, cultural, past, present, and future. I didn't know these artists till they came, these people, till they came together with me for the call to do this ritual. We come together, I give brief instructions, and then we do the ritual. And you can see here that we walked 2 miles in this ritual, and there was a whole, there was probably 75 people from the community that joined us on that walk. And so Miracles in Glory Abound is another installation that I did. It's a sculptural incarnation of Lutz's Washington crossing the Delaware, 13 figures in the boat instead of the 12 that appear in Lutz's painting, which is sometimes called the most famous painting in America. But if you know anything about that painting, you know that it wasn't painted in America, and it is like impossible for that to have happened the way that it's painted. And so I think about who gets to make the myths and whose imaginations are we living on right now? Are we living in whose imaginations created the world that we're living in here? And who gets to imaginate into future, into real places? Who gets to myth make? And so I am entering that inside of this work, which is called Miracles in Glory Abound. The acronym is MAGA. And this has toured. These are a couple of the figures that are seated in the boat. The first figure is the figure with the tennis racket. It's my honoring to Venus and Serena Williams. But it is also me exploring this kind of cosmic bursting, euphoric, intergalactic Black body. This is the installation in a museum. I forget which museum that's in. This is Flint Institute of Art. So creating inside of this installation, not just the objects, but the way that Miracles in Glory works is that it's a fictitious, it's a city park in a not city, in a not world, and it's not real. And the trees are real, not real, and the benches are real, not real, and the lookers are real, not real, because it's me asking, whose imagination is this? Who gets to make this world? And so it's a fake city park, and the monument, the central monument of this city park is this boat, and it's all the lookers in the installation are struck with awe, and their bodies are bursting awake. They're bursting with birds and feet and crystals. And but it is the real, not real. And who gets to make the real, not real, really real? So just an image of some little girls playing while they were seeing the installation. And all of this that I have shared with you, for me, is working through human technology, this place of love, creativity, and the activism that is never not activism if you are insisting on living a whole, full, complete, and true life. And just gonna look through some last images, and I'll take the rest of your questions that I see in the question and answer. I shoot a photo series called The Blacks in my neighborhood. People come to my house. I will search through social media and I'll sort of look to see who's expressing depression or who's expressing that they have a broken heart or that their grief is making it difficult for them to go to work. And I'll call that person. If they're in my community, I'll ask them if they want to take photographs. I'll ask them how they want to feel in the photograph. I will craft clothing, do their hair and do their makeup, and then we'll walk through the community. This is my friend Ramona. I photographed her probably 6 or 7 months after her daughter was killed, and she just needed togetherness and to feel good and to feel seen and heard. And so one of the questions that I asked myself is, what does it mean to be alive as an artist right now? And what does it mean to be alive as an artist in a community right now? So some images of the Blacks. This was my former assistant, who was a student at Yale. And this is what happens when I would walk this parade, this spectacle of beauty through the neighborhood and shooting these images, is that people would join us. It would become like a pilgrimage. It would become this parade, and all the kids in the neighborhood would interview whoever I was photographing. So with my assistant Ada, they would say, "What are you doing? You're a student, you go to Yale. What's Yale? Can I go to Yale? Do you like Yale?" It just becomes this opportunity for expansiveness. Here's the ARThouse, which unfortunately was in a fire. We will rebuild it. But this way of love and sharing, so many people in the neighborhood worked on the ARThouse. People would stand at the bus stop and they would just do a little bit while they were there. This is an image from the night after the Pulse nightclub massacre, where churches at the time were saying that they would not hold vigils for people because it was a gay club. And so I just said, hey, we can get together at the ARThouse, and like 150 people came together. And I think about that question again, whose imaginations are making our neighborhoods? Whose imaginations are making our spaces, the spaces that we can be human in? Because I'm really interested in those spaces that have the flexibility to be as alive as we need them to be alive. And I'm so grateful that the ARThouse is a place that can be like that. So all of this is my citizen artist work, y'all. What am I asking of this? What do I allow myself to ask of the artwork? Last thing is, this is my studio. You can see that it is pretty small, right? And this is an installation that went into the Frick last week. Altars that were seated in the lives and in the stories of Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and Elijah McClain. The aesthetic of this installation I call Grandmother's Living Room Realness meets Street Corner Memorial. This is my grandmother's living room. This is my grandmother and her living room. And you can see that she has this like tiered setup of special things that make her space special and elegant and home for her. Grandmother's Living Room Realness meets Street Corner Memorial. This is Street Corner Memorial in the alleyway up the street from my house. And this artwork is, again, me asking questions and asking, is it possible to use museum spaces and art spaces and art for social healing and reckoning, and to do that on purpose? So this is Grief and Light, and it's an installation that went up last week. It's like 700 bottles, hand-blown bottles, hand-blown, a lot of hand-blown glass. And the opera Unburied, Unmourned, Unmarked plays in the room in the installation, where there's a church pew right in front of the altars. And it's interwoven with an artwork, an audio artwork that I did called The Attempt, which is me attempting to count to 8 minutes and 36 seconds. And it takes me 10 minutes and 51 seconds to count to 8 minutes and 36 seconds, which was actually felt like a really long time. And so that's the last work. It's another angle of it. And it exists in relationship to this neon sign that will go up on the day that George Floyd was murdered. And the neon sign says, what is the opposite of a lynching? And so some of the questions that I'm dealing with now is, what is the opposite of a lynching? Where are spaces for social healing? Do we trust spaces for social healing? And these are places that I'm entering into right now, really thinking about social healing and reckoning and the American story. So I'm going to take some more questions, and then if nobody else has questions, I am going to say goodnight. Hi, sorry for interrupting. You're not interrupting. I'm really curious how you start the process. As you mentioned, you collect various objects. So how do I start? Sometimes I feel like the beginning has already begun and I'm in a perpetual state of experiencing inspiration and moving and working. So singular beginning on an artwork, it can begin with an idea, it can begin with a purpose, it can begin almost with a medicinal need. What do I need this artwork to do? Sometimes it begins with a single object, and I spend time in relationship with that object and excavate the why of that object. Why did this object call to me? What is it? What's the story of this object? What's the sort of, the history of the object? And then I think about the object in the strata: past, present, future, political, spiritual, cultural. So biggest musical inspiration growing up from Jeremy Ha. I really loved country music when I was growing up. I wanted to be a country music star. I loved songs that told stories. So I really loved rap music. Like I loved Slick Rick, because you could follow these complete story arcs in his work, and country music. Also for that reason, I wanted to be a country music singer. But then I saw the way country music treated Black people, and I was like, that's not for me in that way. I'll have to become a country music singer in another way. What do you say to students who are afraid to be artists? Students who are afraid to be artists are also afraid to be themselves, right? They're afraid to let people down. They're afraid of all these expectations that are on them. So I don't say anything specific to students who are afraid to be artists. What I do is affirm their humanity. I affirm their weirdness. I affirm the dimension. I affirm their truth, and really help them to be grounded in their humanness so that they're afraid of less altogether. There's an incredible, there's so much fear here on this land and in this world that it is really just a loving act to be present with people in their isness and as who they are. So that's what I would do, is I would ask the artists, I would ask them what they do that feels good. Like, do they have an artwork that they just go to and that sets their mind free, and to go to that place of joy as being an artist? But then I would just affirm their humanity. Does anybody else have any other questions? I'm gonna stop sharing screen right now and say thank you. If nobody else has any other questions, I will give you a few moments. All right, y'all. So thank you everyone at Brown. Thank you everyone at Pavel Zubik Fine Art. I want to give a shout out to my partner and to all the people, my friends in my life, who showed up for me when the ARThouse was on fire. And what am I looking forward to in life in general? I'm looking forward to buying a farm. That's one of the real things I'm looking forward to. And I want to thank everybody who asked questions and everybody who put in the ingredients in the chat for me to make a poem for you. I wish I could make a poem for everyone. And I wish you well as you all move out into your world, into the rest of this year. And I wish you courage in your life and courage in your love. And I also wish for you the ability to steep every day and with every breath that you take and every blink of your eye, to steep into the fullness of your humanity with guts. So I'm gonna look at these questions and answers just one more time. And then I'm gonna say, can we donate to the ARThouse? Yeah, if you go to, thank you, Antonio. If you go to my Instagram, there's a GoFundMe that's up. It has raised so much more money than I asked for, but it's a fire. So listen, I might not have asked for enough money. Like I acknowledge that. And I could perform country on my own farm. Makes sense. Your place, your rules. I love it. Makes sense to me. Come hear me sing country music, Antonio. So no other questions. I send you all out into this world with so much gratitude for your presence and so much gratitude for the world that you are imagining yourself being fully whole and complete in, because I'm imagining that world too. So I say fare thee well. Bye, y'all. Bye, everybody. Bye. Bye, Suzette. Bye, Mina. Bye, Antonio. Bye, Kelvin. Bye, Heather. Bye, everyone. I'm signing off right now. Super peace.